Hello and welcome back to Aerospace Horizons. My name's Evan, and today I have the pleasure of talking to a now former Blue Angel. He's not that former, though, because he was just on the team last year in 2023 and the year before that in 2022, which of course means that he was featured heavily in the new documentary called Just the Blue Angels, which is streaming now on Amazon Prime Video. You know him from the film as Jemimi, but welcome, Lieutenant Commander Scott Goossens. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Evan. I appreciate it.
How does it feel to be introduced as a former Blue Angel? Is that weird?
It's certainly not weird. It's nice. I mean, it makes you realize that your tour is over, and thankfully it's been completed successfully. So I think everybody who's a former Blue Angel is happy to have that title. But yeah, I mean, it was a phenomenal tour, best tour I've had in the military. I loved every second of it. But you know, life moves on, and it's still good, and I certainly have a lot more free time on my hands than I used to.
There's a huge point in the movie made about you come from the fleet and you go back to the fleet afterwards. So you're still in active duty. What are you up to these days?
I am. I'm active duty Navy still, just like pretty much everyone who leaves the team will go back into the fleet in some capacity, whether that's in the Navy or Marine Corps. So I'm currently an instructor pilot here in Pensacola at VT86, essentially teaching backseaters, so WIZOs and EWOs, so naval flight officers, teaching them in their initial jet training. So it's a really, really fun job. Fortunate to be able to stay here in Pensacola, and the flying's been fantastic.
Paying it forward.
Yeah.
Let's take it like sort of all the way back now, you know, before your time in the Blues and maybe even back to childhood. What was your first sort of experience with aviation, and what inspired you to get into naval aviation in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like so many others who you would talk to who are in naval aviation or you know, who have been fortunate enough to fly with the Blues, the Blue Angels really were my introduction to naval aviation. I grew up in San Francisco, California, which has a rich naval history, but at the time I was growing up, there wasn't a large military presence there. But the one thing that did happen every year was there's Fleet Week Air Show, which we still have out there in San Francisco, and the Blue Angels perform every year. So I remember as a kid being able to look up into the skies and see those blue and gold jets flying over the bay with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. And I just remember thinking it was the coolest job in the world. And I also remember it was the one thing that would stop school. So when the Blue Angels would come to town, they'll do practices on Thursdays and Fridays. And the teachers knew when the Blue Angels got to town, they had no chance of keeping our attention on them. So they'd let us go outside and watch the jets. And I still have, you know, memories of that to this day. And just thinking, you know, not necessarily wanting to be a Blue Angel, but it certainly sparked my interest in naval aviation and eventually pursuing a career as a Navy pilot. I just knew I wanted to fly jets, and you know, I was fortunate enough to be able to go down that path. And when the opportunity presented itself to apply for this team, I knew I'd regret it if I didn't at least put it in an application. So very fortunate to get selected for the team, and sort of a full circle moment when I was able to go back to San Francisco as a pilot on the team, and you know, flying the same show that I remember watching as a kid, and being able to look down and see the place where I grew up. And yeah, surreal moment. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of similar stories like that from people who have been able to fly with the Blues and have the you know, unique opportunity to do that over the place they grew up.
Yeah, you mentioned like it's the same show. I that always struck me. You know, it's like it really is kind of the same show. I mean, there have been tweaks over time, but it really is like the same. Most of the same maneuvers.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been an evolution of the team as we've changed aircraft, and like you said, certain tweaks here and there. But for the most part, it's a similar show. So you know, whether you saw the Blues for the first time in the '60s or you saw them you know, a couple years ago, the experience hopefully is relatively similar.
Now, in the movie, your wingman Cheese, Chris Kapchansky, he mentioned that he applied to the team 3 times before he got in. Did you have a similar experience? Like, did you have to apply a bunch of times to get in, or did you get in first shot?
So my experience was a little bit different than Cheese. I did my junior officers' first fleet tour, as we call it, out in Japan. So I was in VFA 115, the Talons or Eagles, depending on who you talk to, out in Japan for about 3.5 years, and then I came back to the States to be an instructor pilot in VFA 122, and I got back to the States in, I think it was February of 2020. So the first time I put in an application to the Blues was in 2020. And I basically got as far as getting the application in, and then the team froze for COVID, for the pandemic that year. So I think we were supposed to start attending shows as prospective pilots in March, and essentially the whole season got canceled. So I submitted an application, wasn't able to actually rush or attend any of the shows. And then the following season, in 2021, submitted an application, went through the process, and was fortunate enough to get selected. So a little bit different than Cheese, but I guess, yes, 2 applications before I was fortunate enough to be selected.
So let's move on and talk a little bit about the movie here. I just want to, here, let's pop this up here. Can you see this?
Yeah.
This poster. Is this you?
It is me. Yes.
It is you.
I did not know I was on the poster until the day it was released. So kind of a surprise there for sure. And then, yeah, the day it got released, I got a lot of text messages and phone calls and things like that. I guess I had a chin that's relatively recognizable if you know me. Because you can't really see much of the rest of my face with the visor and helmet on. But it was a surprise for sure.
Awesome. So how does it feel to be on a movie poster? Did you get to see it like at a movie theater or anything, or just online?
When we went to the premiere here in Pensacola, I saw it in person, but yeah, obviously mostly just pictures on my phone or that people sent to me and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's an honor for sure. It's an honor to just be associated with the Blue Angels in any respect. So yeah, I feel incredibly honored to be on the poster, but hopefully people pay less attention to the face that's there, and instead of just and pay more attention to just the Blue Angels, which is really what we're all about.
You just have resting Blue Angel face. There's nothing you can do about it. The thing I love about this also is that this formation makes no sense. But whatever, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it was certainly pieced together. I almost positive, just based off of what it looks like in the visor, was probably during a cross under or something behind the crowd where they snagged that. But yeah, obviously not with all those jets surrounding me, but is what it is. Okay,
so the movie makes kind of a big deal of the fact that on your first time doing the vertical brake, you went the wrong way, which I'm sure was great for you to have featured so heavily in the movie. I'm sure you're very pleased about that. But I wanted to know, was that your biggest mistake that you made in your first year there, or was there something that's even more embarrassing that you want to share with us right now?
Oh, geez. Well, so on that maneuver, the vertical brake, it was the first time we were doing it. So it was actually just post the breakout on the rejoin is where I initially rolled the wrong way. So fortunately, it didn't occur during the break because of it.
Yeah, that would be bad.
It ended up much worse for everyone in the formation. Yeah, no, I certainly don't think that was the most embarrassing thing that's happened to me. I can't think of anything specifically off the top of my head, but you talk to any Blue Angel past or present in that first year, especially during winter training in El Centro, you're making mistakes all the time, more mistakes than you can count. So you have to take solace in the small victories you get every day, is whatever those may be. If you get a little better at one maneuver, or really just doing whatever it is that your role is on the team. So yeah, it's certainly not my biggest mistake, and it was one of many mistakes that I made throughout my first year. And trust me, those mistakes don't end when you get into your second year flying on the team either. So yeah, plenty of mistakes all around.
In that same vein, was there a particular maneuver that you'd say was like the hardest one for you to get right in either year, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you talk to any diamond pilot, probably specifically in the 3 or the 4 spots, the maneuver that they will always tell you is the most difficult is usually the fan brake, or the echelon parade pass is sometimes how it's described. A maneuver that looks incredibly simple. It's just the 4 jets kind of stacked down the bearing line of each other, going right in front of the crowd, and looks like a nice, easy left turn, but it is one of the most difficult maneuvers to do well. And it's incredibly frustrating, and one you work on the entire season. And if you can, capture just a couple, 1 or 2 throughout the course of the season that you really, really feel good about and feel like you nailed, then that's great. That's a great year in terms of flying the fan brake. So I would say that is the most difficult, and ironically, from the crowd's perspective, one that probably looks the most simple to fly. But I can assure you it's not. Going into the 4-year, obviously the double Farvel is always one that's challenging. It's certainly unique in terms of just flying in naval aviation in general. There's no real scenario in which you find yourself flying inverted formation on another airplane at 200 feet and 400 knots. But it's one that you certainly take a lot of pride in when you are in the 4 spot, in terms of doing that maneuver well and doing it, I guess, being consistent in your ability to execute it well and to execute it safely. And by the end of the year, it's one of the most fun maneuvers to do, and one that's very exciting, and one that you certainly miss doing once you leave the team.
Later on in the interview, I want to get into some more like technical, nerdy questions about the maneuvers and stuff like that. So maybe we'll come back to why the fan brake is so difficult, because I'm really curious about that. But the cinematography in the movie is incredible. Obviously, we've seen all the behind the scenes with there being a helicopter, inside the aerobatic box, and how unprecedented that was. Was that something that, how much did that impact your demonstrations, and was it something that you were nervous about when you first heard about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing no one can say about this movie is that the cinematography or aerial cinematography isn't world class and first rate. The footage that they got is unbelievable, and footage that not only the general public hasn't seen before, but footage that Blue Angels pilots haven't seen before from the perspectives that they were able to capture it from. And that's just a testament to Jessica Young, Kevin LaRosa, Mike Fitzmaurice. Just the work that they did is incredible. For as far as the helicopter in the aerobatic box and that footage, it's really funny. I think people would always ask us like, oh, you were in your first year on the team. Wasn't that so distracting, having all the cameras around and the helicopter? And was it so different from kind of what you had done before? I think in a certain sense for Cheese and I, being really the new 2 pilots, the ignorance was almost bliss. Because everything was different. Nothing about the Blue Angel experience in terms of being a new pilot on the team, the type of flying you're doing, anything that you're doing on a daily basis on that team is similar to what you were doing previously in the fleet. So, when we came into work and we were going through that first winter training as pilots, and there was camera crews and helicopters and all that stuff, in our minds, we were like, well, I guess this is just how it is. So it really wasn't as big of a shock to the system, I think, specifically in the regards of having cameras or the helicopter around, as just the whole experience was. So it really wasn't until my second year on the team, after filming had wrapped, that I realized, how much quieter things got, and how much more simple life was with no cameras around and no coordination with a helicopter in the aerobatic box recording our maneuvers. But all that being said, I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to do that, our first year on the team, because they really did capture some incredible footage. But certainly probably not the distraction, at least for a new pilot, as you might think. I'm sure it was much more distracting for the returning pilots who had a season or 2 under their belts without any of that stuff present.
When did you sort of find out about the movie? Like, when you joined the team, like, did they say like, hey, this is also happening, or did you show up your first day and suddenly there were camera crews? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure we all found out about it when we were khaki newbies. So when we joined the team in September of 2021, and we started sitting in on meetings and really, being a part of the team, and really just absorbing during that turnover period, which is the khaki newbie phase, was when we first heard that there was a movie in the works and it might potentially be happening the following season. And then I remember when we were in Huntington Beach for a show, after one of our debriefs, we kind of had a meet and greet with all the producers and director and all that. So that was I guess the first introduction to the people who we would eventually be working with on the film, even though our scope, our situational awareness, I should say, on the topic as khaki newbies was nothing. We didn't know too much about it, but I think that was the first time we had heard that it was going to happen. And then clearly, once we got into the 2022 season and started going through winter training and all that, we knew it was certainly more of a reality. And then obviously the one day the camera crew showed up and then it was happening. So that's kind of how at least our process was of learning about it.
You're just along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you and I are roughly the same age, and I grew up watching the Around the World at the Speed of Sound documentary about the Blue Angels, directed by Rob Stone, and featuring Boss Wooldridge, who makes an appearance in this movie. Were you familiar with that movie going into doing this? And like, did you get to meet those guys, and did you know who they were when you entered the film?
Yeah, so I didn't know about Around the World at the Speed of Sound when I was younger. I think I watched it for the first time once I had already been actually in the Navy flying F-18s. So I was certainly aware when I got to the team, and then when we met Rob Stone and Boss Wooldridge for the first time. So yeah, pretty incredible to meet them. I know from speaking with you, that's a movie that was pretty instrumental in terms of your love of the team and passion for aviation growing up. But yeah, for me, I didn't really know a ton about that film as a kid. For me, it was, I was fortunate enough to live in a city where the Blue Angels performed every year, so that was sort of my exposure to it. But yeah, great, certainly a great film. And I know you've interviewed Boss Wooldridge and Rob Stone, and just two fantastic people all around. They were a pleasure to get to meet and to work with throughout this project, and still close friends to this day.
Awesome. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of more broadly your time on the team, and specifically your second year, obviously, because the movie follows your first year, and then you had a new role in the second year. You took over for Chomps in the number 4 jet, and you became the training officer, and so took over all the stuff that we see him doing in the movie. What was it like for you stepping into that role and suddenly having like that additional responsibility?
Yeah, it's certainly different. I think your first year on the Blue Angels, you are certainly a student, right? You are learning every single day, trying to master your position, trying to get better at it, and really just learn how to be a Blue Angel and be the best Blue Angel you can be. And like most things in the Navy, just when you feel like you start to get a grasp on that, it is time for a job change. So I will say on the Blue Angels, that job change occurs much more quickly than I think it does in maybe other squadrons in the Navy, as you may be aware of or not. But they highlight in the film, we fly that last show end of season, and while we're in the air, they're already changing parking spots and names on the doors. So you finish that show on a Saturday, you're back to work on Monday, and you're wearing a new number and you've got a new job. So certainly I did my best in the last few weeks there to try to talk to Chomps and make sure I was squared away on moving into the 4 spot and developing a training plan for the 2023 team, which every team on the Blue Angels is different, right? Every single year is a completely different experience and a completely different team. The 2022 team, we had a third-year boss, and everyone on that team, apart from Cheese and I, were going into at least their third year on the team. We rolled into the 2023 season and we had a brand new boss, and new pilots as well. So it's trying to develop that training plan for a brand new boss versus a third year boss and brand new wingman. It's just different. So Chomps was certainly an asset for me, and he prepared us, I think, very well to make that transition into 2023. But also reaching back and talking to former Blue Angels who were in that 3-4 spot rotation and kind of how they handled it, what their kind of lessons learned were going through a season in the 4 spot, specifically the ones that were training new boss and a new 3, which was the situation I found myself in 2023. So fortunately, the Blue Angels network is very tight, and everyone is certainly willing to pick up the phone and talk to you, which is great. And everyone has a vested interest in making the next team, the team after they leave, even better than the team that they were on is. So I think that mindset really lends itself to continuing to propel this team forward and make it better and better every single year.
You mentioned number 3. Obviously, number 3 and number 4 have a very close relationship. So your incoming number 3 in your 4-year was Amanda Lee, who we saw in the movie be selected. And in 2023, she joined the formation. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what it was like working with her, training her up for the 3 spot? And then also, sort of now that you're off the team and she's now in your 4 spot, what it's like seeing her take over that role.
Yeah. Amanda is a fantastic pilot and an even better person. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to have that 2023 season as 4 with her as 3. She made my job easy. She was a great pilot, great student, and like everyone on the team, interested in just getting better and being the best Blue Angel they can be and being the best teammate they can be. And it was really a cool experience, kind of going from that 3 spot where towards the end of the season when, Amanda was there as a khaki newbie, kind of talking to her and letting her know kind of what I was doing in that 3 spot, to then, like I said, over the course of a weekend, we show up on Monday, I'm wearing a number 4, she's in a blue suit wearing a number 3, and now we're, back at square one, building a demo for a brand new team and just seeing that progression. And I'm sure, if you talk to her at the end of this season, or if you talk to any former 4, I think seeing that progression of the 3 pilot when they are the 4 pilot over the course of the season is one of the most rewarding aspects of the job. It's great to see the whole formation come along, the whole Delta, the whole Diamond, but really seeing that brand new 3 pilot, like we all were at some point, if you did that 3 to 4 job transition there, where you're just, you don't know what you don't know, to getting to a point at the end of the season where, you're the best left wing pilot in the entire Navy. And seeing her make that progression was incredible. It was rewarding for me and so cool to see her do that. And I know she's doing a great job as 4 right now, and she'll do a great job teaching the new 3 as well.
Yeah, I always feel a little sad for 1 and 2 because they don't get to switch it up. They just do the same thing both years.
Yeah, I guess that's good and bad depending on I guess how you look at it. But I think at least for 2 going into their 2nd year, they've kind of got that position on lock, which is good because they've got a tall task ahead of them with a brand new boss coming in and being able to kind of speak that language to the boss much more, I guess, less X's and O's or less numbers, but it's a little bit more art from that 2 spot. When they're giving feedback to boss, it's less like you didn't go at the, you were at 1.2 DME instead of 1.3 DME. It's more like, hey boss, that roll just didn't feel right, or that break the seal of the initial pull was just too quick. So it's much more nuanced and a little bit more, I guess, poetic in that two spot, and being able to be an effective communicator to a new boss and let them know and give them that feedback to be able to improve is crucial, because three pilot is always going to be brand new. So they have no idea if that roll was too quick or too slow, but that second year too, they do. So it's an important role to have, and it's good that they don't also have to learn a brand new position while trying to do that.
Now, my understanding was you were originally going to be a solo, right? Is that correct? And then plans changed. Can you talk a little bit about like what happened there? And is there a part of you that kind of, wishes you could have had that experience?
Oh no! I was initially 7. I was selected to be 7 in 2021 in October, I think, is when they let us know what positions we were going to be the following season. So I kind of went through the newbie process as 7, learning from Whiskers, Julius Braden, who was the 7 at the time, and then started the, I guess, first part of the 2022 season. We were still in 2021, but it was November, December of 2021. As 7, doing the winter visits, going to the show sites for the 2022 season, and kind of doing that job on the road and making sure everything was laying flat for the following year. And then, one weekend, I think it was a Saturday or something, Push Pop, who is currently number 5 on the team, went on a bicycle ride with Chomps and ended up with a broken collarbone. So fortunately, he's totally fine and healed up just fine. But he was the 3 pilot at the time, and unfortunately, you can't fly the left wing position with a broken collarbone. So it happened on a Saturday. We had a team meeting, and we were able to make the decision to execute a position swap, which was great because we were able to keep Push Pop on the team, just move him into the 7 spot, allow him time to heal, and he could narrate and execute the duties as 7. And then I just stepped into the 3 spot and started flying the left wing. It was a little daunting, I think, initially when it happened, just because I had spent the whole kind of turnover period, khaki newbie process, memorizing the narration and learning how to do that and those duties, and I hadn't even opened the demo manual to kind of figure out what to do in the 3 spots. So it was a bit of a trial by fire. Like I said, I think it happened on a Saturday. Sunday I panic studied, and then Monday I was flying in the Blue Angel Diamond. So it was like most things on this team, happens very quickly, and there's a sharp learning curve. But fortunately, Boss Kesselring and Chomps and Cheese, they were fantastic and really kind of welcomed me in and got me up to speed, and we were able to execute the rest of winter training and be good to go going into the 2022 season. Does any part of me wish that I was a solo? I think looking back on it now, hindsight being 2020, it was probably one of the best things that ever could have happened to me. I loved flying in the 3 spot. It was such a great experience, and being able to fly closer to another jet than anyone else in the world, I think is a pretty cool thing to have been able to say that you've had the opportunity to do. And then even more so in the second year, moving into the 4 spot, I think that's the best flying job in the world. Don't tell the solos, but you're not going to get there's no better view in the house. You get to watch every air show. Your role within the demonstration is a ton of fun. And it was just the most fun I've had flying in my entire life in that second year in the 4 spot.
I know you guys have some healthy competition, so I want to talk a little bit more about the crew rotation. We've sort of touched on it, how quick everything is, and they're changing out the parking spots when you're doing your final show, and there's a whole system in place for this. And to an outsider who's not well versed in how the team works, that might seem kind of weird, right? Like, why would you get rid of all this institutional knowledge? Why would you, get rid of all these people who are so good at the job? It just doesn't make sense on the face of it. So I wanted to get your take on like your experience with how that operates and how the crew rotation works, and like why you think that has been such a successful aspect of the team, because obviously it's worked out well for 78 years.
Yeah. Well, I think there's kind of two parts to that, or two answers, I guess, to that question. The first is while it is a quick transition in terms of taking down the signs and putting the new names up and changing suits, and you're done on a Saturday, back to work on a Monday as a brand new team, the turnover process is significantly longer than that. So once you get selected for the team, you find out in July, you join the team in September. So you essentially get almost 2.5 months of turnover with the current team. And most of that turnover is just learning how to be a Blue Angel and kind of how the team, I should say, operates on a daily basis, which is significantly different than how you've ever done anything before in the fleet Navy. So the turnover process is one of the most thorough and best turnovers I've ever had in any job in the Navy. So while it may seem like it happens in an instant, you really do have a lot of time to learn what you're going to do next. Now, obviously, unfortunately, if your position swaps right after the new season ends, maybe you didn't have all that time before, but for the most part, you have a ton of time to really figure it out, which is great. The other part of it, in terms of the length of the tours, right? Like, why do we not have people be Blue Angels for 5 years or 10 years? You could be so good at the job, and you wouldn't have to start over from scratch every single year with a new team. I think there's multiple reasons to that. I think nobody joined the Navy. No one who's on the team joined the Navy to just be a Blue Angel. We joined the Navy to serve our country and to fly F-18s or whatever your role is on the team, to do that in support of the nation in whatever capacity that you can. And the Blue Angels is something that we're fortunate to be able to do for just a couple years. And I think you want that freshness on the team. You want people coming straight out of the fleet, putting their whole soul and being into this job for 2 years, and having that unique opportunity and really the privilege to represent the over 800,000 Navy and Marine Corps personnel who are stationed throughout the world, and to be able to represent what they do, their professionalism, to the American public through flight demonstrations and community outreach, and being able to do that just for a couple of seasons, just for a couple of years on the team, and then move on and go back to the fleet and kind of take all the lessons you've learned and everything that's so special about this organization, like you said, that has been built up over the last 78 years, and bring that back to the fleet, and bring that back to whatever squadron you may be going to, and try and push that out. And hopefully that inspires future pilots or WIZOs or EWOs, backseaters, maintenance officers, whatever you may be. Hopefully that inspires them to one day apply to the Blue Angels and be a part of it. So I think you want that, like I said, you want that rotation. You want as many people as possible to be a part of this organization, because I think it benefits the fleet in the long run. And the other part of it is it's not about the individual. It's about the blue suit. It's about the crest that we're fortunate to wear for that short amount of time. And, no one person made the Blue Angels what it is, right? It's, you have the privilege to be able to go into this organization and wear a suit and wear a crest that, people who have come before you have really made what it is today, and allowed you that ability to go out and inspire and to execute this mission. And then after you leave, there's going to be more people who come in after you to do the same thing. So I think those are really the two answers to your question.
I want to ask you some nerdy technical questions now,
Yeah, sure.
if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
So we talked about it earlier. The fan brake was the maneuver that you said was really hard, and it doesn't look hard. Why is it so hard?
Oh, it's hard to explain. It's just an incredibly difficult maneuver to fly, and it's the one where I would say each jet has the most, I guess, influence on the other jets in the formation. So if one person is off or not flying a perfect set, if they're a little too far forward or a little too far aft, or they're a little too high or a little too low, that's just going to rocket ripple all the way down the line and then come right back up the line. So I'd say there's no maneuver where a deviation from a pilot in the formation affects the other pilots as much. So it's one where everyone has to just be perfect. And that is so hard, if not impossible to do. So I think that's what makes the fan brake so difficult. And like I said, watching from the ground, it looks like, oh, here they go, just from right to left in a line. That looks pretty relaxed, and it is the exact opposite. I think maneuvers that look the most simple to the general public are actually the ones that are the most difficult to execute, because you want that just frozen formation going down the line, and that's much easier said than done. So I think, yeah, Diamond 360, fan brake, those are incredibly difficult maneuvers to do well.
You talked about it a little bit in the movie as well, that most formation flying is done on the right wing, and being on the left wing is sort of unnatural. Why is that? Why is it so much harder to be on the left wing than on the right wing, and why do they do it in the fleet, more right wing flying?
Pretty much the only time we're flying in tight formation like that, well, not like Blue Angel type formation, but what we call fleet parade, is when you're coming in to land overhead the field or at the aircraft carrier, and executing what we call the carrier brake. So you're coming in and you're 800 feet above ground level, and then you're executing a left-hand brake turn to enter a landing pattern, and then to ultimately land on the ship or on a runway. So when you execute that, whoever's leading the formation, if they're braking left, the way that everyone is kind of stacked, whether it's one other jet or three other jets, is off their right wing down like that 45-degree bearing line. So everyone is looking to their left at the jet that's in between them and the lead, and flying like that when they're flying in formation. So when you get to the Blue Angels, if you're fortunate enough to be on the right wing, it just feels a little bit more natural. Also, your stick is in between your legs and your throttle's on your left. So being able to look left, it's just ergonomically, it's a little bit nicer, and it's more natural from the fleet flying that you've done. So when you get to the left wing position on the Blue Angels, now not only are you flying closer than you've ever flown before to another airplane, but you're also kind of in a ergonomically awkward position, and you're staring in a direction that you're not super, super familiar with. Is it mind-boggling and a showstopper? Absolutely not, but it certainly takes some time to get used to, and just the inputs that you're making, whether you're in a roll or whatever turn it may be, is just different than what you're used to executing if you have plenty of time flying on that right wing. Got it.
And in the movie, you also talk about the idea of these sets and the fleet parade, you called it, and the blue gold Yankee set and all that stuff. And I know that during formation flying, you're looking at the plane that you're flying formation off of, and you're sort of looking at different reference points on the jet. Is that correct? To sort of gauge how far away you are.
Yep.
Do those points change as you move the sets in, or is it always the same points that you're looking at?
So if you can understand the concept of a bearing line, so think of just like a 45-degree line off of the jet, whether it goes down the left or down the right, that sight picture that you're using, that kind of paint, so to speak, that you're flying, that remains the same to stay on that bearing line. And then as you move closer or further away on that bearing line, now your 90-degree off reference will change. So for on the left side, we would always have Boeing basically underlined with the Lex and then the leading edge of the left wing. We would have that. So the Boeing, the G there would be kind of right in the corner of the like I said, the lex and the leading edge of the wing. So that's kind of what we would be looking at all the time in diamond set as we'd be moving closer or further away on bearing line. However, our 90-degree reference point would change depending on how close we wanted to get. So the furthest away that we would start, we'd essentially line up the burner cans of the engine, of the two engines, so they were flush. Then the burner band, which is sort of the closest forward portion of the engine, and then you really march it all the way in from there, from aft buno to forward buno to trailing edge flap to what we call a Thursday set, into a blue gold set, and then into a Yankee set. So there are plenty of bearing lines, and it takes a long time to work your way all the way in to where you're finally in that Yankee set. So it's not a overnight thing. It is a months-long process that really takes not just the course of winter training, but the course of the entire season to achieve the tighter sets that you'll see flown in the Blue Angels.
Lots of acronyms, lots of nicknames, all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah.
Similarly, with the line abreast loop, does that have sets as well? Because that's a bit of a different thing, is my understanding. Because you're sort of, it's distance laterally, right? Like how do you gauge how close you are? Because that does come in over the course of the season, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It is similar. It is very similar in the sense that we still use references to gauge our distance. It's just different references than what I just spoke about. So in that, the most important thing is to make sure that you're completely line abreast of boss, and that's a function of essentially, as you're looking 90 degrees off, basically over your shoulder, making sure his helmet is aligned correctly, and then the canopy bow is aligned correctly. Once you're line abreast, you can then determine distance based off of where the low, or like the wingtip, where that really falls on the letters on the side of the jet, specifically the U.S. Navy that's written along essentially the sides of the intakes there on either side of the jet. And then same kind of thing, we will just march that in by letter or half a letter throughout the course of the season once the control and the consistency improves throughout the course of the year. And that will fall on 4 to determine, as you saw in the film, when it's time, or when that consistency has been achieved to essentially make that distance a little bit closer.
Awesome. Now I've noticed obviously sometimes jets have issues, and one has to land and get a new jet, right? And when that happens to Boss, the entire formation has to stand down essentially till he gets in the air again. And my understanding is that he does not fly a 2-seater because that interferes with the aerodynamics of the wingman flying on formation on him. Is that correct?
It's really more of just the sight picture, and really just the consistency for Boss to make sure he's always in a single seater. But
he always lands with number 3, yeah. Right? And why is that? Why is it number 3 specifically who he lands with? Kind
of like you touched on, anyone can fall out of the formation except for Boss. If Boss falls out, we can't fly. So why do 1 and 3 always land if Boss has a problem with the jet airborne? 3 always flies the Boss spare. So we do our best to keep everybody kind of in the same jets throughout the course of the season if we can, but obviously with maintenance, things change. But there's, I would say, more of an effort to ensure Boss is in the jet that they like and that they want to be in, and they're in on a consistent basis because they're the ones kind of running the show, and you want them to be as comfortable as possible. So usually the second favorite jet of Boss winds up in the 3 spot. So, and when I say second favorite, maybe just the one that Boss is used to flying, I guess second after the jet that they're normally in. So that way, if Boss does have a problem either on deck or airborne, boss will always hop into the 3 jet, and then the 3 pilot will hop into the spare if we have one, and then they'll get back into the formation. Another reason why why is it 3 and not 2? If you remember, the 4 pilot just spent the previous year flying in the 3 spot, right? So if there's a fallout in the diamond, the easiest fallout is always number 3, because 4 can fill that 3 spot, and has a season's worth of experience under their belt to be able to reference and fly that position. I don't want to say relatively easily, but with some experience versus going to the 2 spot. Now, that being said, 4 is also really the utility player throughout the whole formation. So other than boss, right, if 2 falls out or if 3 falls out, 4 will fill that position in the diamond. And then when we get to Delta and all 6 jets are together, if 5 or 6 has fallen out, then 4 will fly in the 5 or the 6 position during Delta as well.
Definitely sounds like the hardest spot to be.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think it's just it's you just have to be versatile in flying, and it's also always a 2nd-year pilot that's in that position. So within the formation, they generally have a certain degree of experience flying the demo at that point. So I don't think it's the hardest or most difficult. I just think it's good to have somebody who has a little bit more demo experience to be able to to shift and to go into a different position if they have to.
I'm just trying to give you some credit, Scott. Come on. Now, the team obviously has a lot of contingency plans in case of weather and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You have obviously the high show and the low show and the flat show and stuff like that. To what degree is that like the differences between those? Like, is that all memorized? Do you have, a master list somewhere in your cockpit that has every possible permutation, or are you just like totally reliant on boss to, define, if you have to change midway through, even sometimes you high show for the first half and the weather comes in, you have to switch over to a low show. Mm-hmm. To what degree are the wingmen aware of, the changes and how that's going to flow?
All of the wingmen know the different types of shows and the maneuvers in those different types of shows. However, boss holds the hammer on what show we're going to fly. 4 or 5 usually can recommend a shift to a different type of show if they're seeing weather that maybe boss isn't. But at the end of the day, boss holds the hammer on that. And throughout the show, there are points within the show that are essentially built in where it makes it very easy to transition from, let's say, a low show to a high show or vice versa. So it is well thought out and planned in terms of how we can do it relatively seamlessly, or how the team, I should say, can do it relatively seamlessly to switch to a different type of show. But yeah, all the wingmen certainly know the maneuvers and are well aware of what a shift in show means, but boss holds the hammer on what type of show the team's going to fly.
Longtime Blue Angel fans know that there's a spring on the stick, applying it's 45 pounds of forward pressure on your, so you have to hold that the whole time. How difficult is that? How hard was that to get used to?
I would say just like our formation, or just like the formation flying in the Blue Angels, you don't start with 45 pounds of stick pressure. So there's 4 different spring settings, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the team will start on spring setting 1 at the beginning of winter training, and then work up to 2, 3, and 4, and then 4 is what they'll be on for the remainder of the season, or really by the time the season starts. So it certainly is different. You're not flying a jet in the fleet that has a spring attached to it that pulls the stick forward, but it increases your fidelity of control movements with the stick tremendously. So as you get up to, once you are used to spring setting 4, I should say, at least if you're a diamond pilot, there's never a time where you wish you could go back to spring setting 3 or spring setting 2. I think I've only ever at points wished that maybe we could have a heavier stick spring at certain points, especially if it's pretty rough air out there, or there's a lot of turbulence. But yeah, it's just like anything else. It's something that you build up to throughout the course of winter training, and then in terms of how you're actually handling that weight that you have to hold pretty much the entire show. The pilots will fly with their rudder pedals much closer to themselves than you would in a normal fleet F-18. And that allows you to create a fulcrum where you can kind of rest your forearm on your thigh while you're holding the stick. So you're not just dead arming 45 pounds for 45 minutes as you're flying a demo.
I always imagine you guys coming out with like, your right arm is like totally jacked and your left arm is like
that does happen. You certainly have a stronger right arm than you have left arm. I think that's unavoidable. And then obviously some calluses and things like that on your right hand from just where or how you hold the stick and how the control stick may rub against your different parts of your hand. But all those have fortunately gone away on my hand now, having flown in the demo for a little bit of time. So it's only temporary.
To go back to the vertical brake, which we talked about, when you're number 4, you do a sort of negative G maneuver out of that, right? How many negative Gs are you feeling in that moment?
It's usually just under a G. So it's about negative 0.7 or 0.8. And honestly, it's as simple with that 45-pound spring as really just releasing your grip on it and guiding it to make sure that your wings stay level. And that spring really does all the work for the breakout on that maneuver.
A little bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, you do get to float in your seat a little bit. It's kind of nice. And, it's in the 4 spot, you're fortunate to be able to take a fair amount of people on rides in the demo. The 4 spot is 4 and 5 spot usually are where most people wind up if they're fortunate enough to get a ride in a Blue Angel demo, and that's always a fun part of the show because they get that little sense of weightlessness, and then once you finish that maneuver and you're going around for the rejoin, the whole show has been, for the most part, relatively low to the ground other than the takeoff maneuver. So that's the first time they really get to arc around the show site or practice site or wherever it may be and look down and kind of see what it's like going from 200 feet all the way up to, 800 or 8,000 feet, I should say. It's quite the quick change in perspective.
It's in the trailer and then it's in the movie as well. What does ready, roll, hat mean?
So ready roll is a command to roll, and then hat stands for height above terrain, which is your altitude sourcing. So it's essentially just to make sure that we're seeing hat in our HUD, which is the altitude sourcing that we're referencing versus baro, or which would be barometric pressure for altitude, or RAD-ALT, so radar altimeter. So just to make sure everyone's referencing the same altitude sourcing. So therefore, we all are at the correct altitudes as we're heading inbound on those crossing maneuvers is usually when you'll hear that. So that's a call you'll hear out of the loop break cross. So when you're on the down of the loop break cross after everyone's split up and before they start coming back together for the cross.
And are you on barometric or radar, or does it switch throughout the demo?
We will, in the Diamond, I should say, in the Diamond and in Delta, unless there's a reason not to, we'll pretty much always reference hat. I think the Solos, you'd have to ask them, but I'm pretty sure they reference their radar altimeter for most of their solo maneuvers. But hat is usually extremely reliable in the Super Hornet, and certainly when we get together as a Delta, when the team gets together as a Delta, it's a good altitude source to reference.
Awesome. Well, thank you for indulging my nerdy aviation questions. So I just we'll just close it out here with a little bit. We'll take a little bit back, a little more philosophical question to close us out here. You're obviously a very humble guy, right? All the Blue Angels are. But you have to be aware that there are kids out there who are watching you and watching you fly and who've watched this movie, and, who might be inspired, to become pilots, or they might even fly with the team in 30 years, who knows? Even if it's not aviation related, right? They can take the ethos of the team away and take it to heart, kind of like I did. What is sort of the number one thing that you hope those kids take away from their inspiration of the team and apply to their lives?
When I was on the team, people always kind of referred to us as a recruiting tool for the Navy and for the Marine Corps, which undoubtedly, the Blue Angels are. However, whenever I would go out to a school or interact with anyone on Crowdline, I always felt that our mission wasn't to recruit for the military, but it was to inspire a culture of excellence and service to country. So whatever it is that you want to do, put all of your effort and all of your passion into it and try and be the best that you can possibly be. Whether that's, being a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, an artist, whatever that may be, pursue that with, or to the best of your abilities. And in doing so, try and be a part of something that's greater than yourself. Try and give back to whether it's giving back to your country, giving back to your community, whatever it may be, try and do something like that. And that doesn't mean you have to join the military. You can volunteer in your local community. You can coach a baseball team. All of those things are important and things that people need, and that's good for, that's for the greater good. So obviously, I went the route of being a Navy pilot, and it's a great career, and I've loved it. And I can tell you that if that's something that you are a kid and you want to do it. It's fantastic. You'll meet great people. You'll have some phenomenal experiences, and it's just a fantastic job. But if there's other things that you're interested in doing, I hope that the Blue Angels can inspire you to pursue that, and then just to be a better citizen of your country and of your community. And to that point, I'd say, 99% of people at the first sign of failure or at the first misstep or difficulty will give up. And if you have the fortitude to not do that and to continue to pursue your dream, whatever that may be, you're already well ahead of the game. I mean, you mentioned Cheese earlier. He applied to the team 3 times. That's not a unique thing from pilots who have made it onto the Blue Angels. I would say that is more common than not, that people have to apply multiple times. And that is not an easy process, or a process that does not consume a lot of your time. So if you have that fortitude and you have that mental toughness to continue to pursue your dreams, even when you do have setbacks, it's a great skill to have, and something that's going to pay dividends in the long run.
Beautiful. Scott, I think we're going to start to wrap up here. I just wanted to ask you if there's anything that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to make sure you relayed to the audience here.
Go see the movie, obviously, if you can see it in theaters, watch it on Prime Video. But even more so, go see the 2024 team. They're phenomenal. They're phenomenal people, and they are the best in the world at what they do. So the movie is great, but nothing beats, as I'm sure you can attest, to seeing the Blue Angels in person. So get out there, go see the show, and if you can meet them on Crowdline, even better, because they are just absolutely fantastic people, and they're doing a great job, and they're continuing, just like teams in the future will, of continuing to push this organization or propel it further ahead and just making it better every single year. So I'm just honored to have been a small part of the history of this team.
Go see every air show you possibly can. They're so fun. And go see the movie, like you mentioned. It's on Amazon Prime Video right now. And other than that, Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks for having me.